Okay, so what we're going to be looking at today is essentially the looking a little bit more further into the Lewis structure of molecules, but more so incorporating the idea of orbitals and looking at the bonding that happens with orbitals when those happen. So when we're drawing a simple Lewis structure, we're not really talking about the electrons and the orbitals that are there that are involved. We're more just drawing the structure to maybe see the shape of it or what's bonded to what. But now we're going to delve a little bit deeper into what do those orbitals look like once bonding occurs. So a bond results, so when we're creating a bond, when we have a covalent bond, and we're referring to covalent bonds here, when we have two half-filled orbitals or hybrid orbitals, which we'll talk about later on, that are overlapping. Okay, so essentially you have one orbital overlapping with another orbital. So for example, we'll take a look down here for a second. So hydrogen. So let's say we're looking at a hydrogen molecule, right? So it's a single covalent bond. We have hydrogen. So hydrogen's energy level diagram, we have one half-filled orbital that's the 1s orbital type. So that's what this picture is actually showing you. So this is one hydrogen's 1s, and this is the second hydrogen 1s. So one's coming, of course, from this hydrogen, and then this is exactly the same thing, but of course a different electron. So what happens is when these two orbitals overlap, this is creating a covalent bond. Right? So we have those electrons that were separated can now spend their time in both of those orbitals since they have an overlap. So this picture here is kind of just showing the two spaces kind of overlapping. It kind of looks like a big blob of space. But keep in mind, it's two 1s orbitals that are overlapping with one another. So when you have that overlap happening, it's important to make note that the two electrons are going to have opposite spin, right? And that goes with the same reasoning as before. When you have two electrons that are occupying the same space, they're going to be moving in opposite spins. So same thing happens when you have two orbitals that have now overlapped. They're essentially sharing the same space with one another. So you're going to have one in the positive half spin, one in the negative half spin. So what ends up happening is now, because you have a bonded orbital, so two orbitals that are overlapping, they are now lower in energy than they were when they were at atomic orbitals or hybrid orbitals. So essentially, creating a bond lowers the amount of energy that atom or ion in particular now will possess. So what does that mean? It means that this covalent bond is relatively stable. So of course, when we're doing covalent bonds, the whole reason why these bonds exist is to create stability. So let me go through and show you what this would look like if we were to draw this out as an energy level diagram. So we're still going to be working with hydrogen here. So we have, I'll use different colors. So we'll have one hydrogen that's red and one that's maybe green. So this dashed line, when we look at a Lewis structure, what this is now indicating is we have two overlapping orbitals. Okay, now which orbitals are overlapping? It has to be the ones from the atom that are, first of all, in the valence shell, and secondly, it has to be half filled. So as a reminder, the valence electrons are only the s and p electrons in the highest n number. So of course, hydrogen's a very simple atom. It only has the one s. But let's say we had a larger atom. If you recall, when we first learned about energy level diagrams, we did talk about valence electrons. The valence electrons are the highest s and p electrons within the highest energy level, or the n number. So let's take a look. So hydrogen, right? So our first hydrogen here is a 1s orbital. that's half filled. The other hydrogen, we'll do it in a different color here, is also a 1s orbital with only one electron in it. So what ends up happening is these are going to be overlapping with each other to now be occupying the same space. So if we were to draw this out, I know the drawing was in the slide beforehand, but it's nice to kind of see this. So we have a hydrogen 1s, another hydrogen 1s. So those two electrons can now basically buzz around in these two overlapped spaces. Now, remember that when you're doing your drawings, you're going to have these one up and one down, because if they're occupying the same space now, we have to make sure that we are showing it, that they're in opposite spin. Okay, so now this bond, this is a single covalent bond, right? We just have one dashed line. So single covalent bonds also go by a different name. So they're called sigma bonds. And this symbol is like the sigma sign. So this here, this overlap of orbitals is really called a sigma bond. A sigma bond. So we have one half-filled orbital overlapping with another half-filled orbital. So the electrons are now occupying the same space. So this diagram here that we're showing with the actual lines and half arrows, this is called an orbital diagram. So whenever you're asked to draw an orbital diagram, it means you're basically going to have the orbitals. Of course, everything is properly labeled, and we draw this rectangle to indicate where the overlapping is happening. This picture here, where we have the actual spheres, like these shapes of orbitals overlapping, I tend to call these, I call it a 3D representation. Really, it's just you're showing the orbitals. Instead of the lines with the arrows and a rectangle, you're actually showing the shapes of orbitals overlapping. Okay, so this was all with hydrogen. We're going to go over this all again with the next couple of examples. So here we have another example. We're looking at HCl, so hydrogen chloride, right? So HCl. Okay, so hydrogen has one S with one electron in it. And chlorine, we're showing just the shorthand configuration here, but these are chlorine's valence electrons. There are 7 valence electrons. It's in group 17, which makes sense. So the only half-filled orbital that's here actually is a p orbital. So let me kind of branch off and do this on another page here. So we have hydrogen, the 1s, right? That's our hydrogen orbital that's going to be ready to fill in here. But chlorine, and I'll use a different color for chlorine, chlorine's valence shell is really, pardon me, yes, 3s filled and 3p that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So even though this is the valence shell for chlorine, the only electron here that has the ability to bond is this last one. The reason for that is, remember, you need to have a half-filled orbital in order to create a bond. You cannot create a bond with something that's already full, because remember, the maximum number of electrons that can fit there are 2. So when you're drawing an orbital diagram here for molecules, you do not have to draw all of these orbitals. The only one you will have to draw is the one that is involved in bonding. So really, when we go to do this, my chlorine, the only one I'm going to show, just to avoid confusion, is my half-filled 3p. So these are the 2 orbitals that are going to be forming my sigma bond. All right, so remember, chlorine looks like this. So this sigma bond that I'm showing here is representing this sharing of electrons. It's hydrogen's 1s overlapping with chlorine's half-filled 3p. So what does that look like? Okay, well, here's chlorine. Remember that 3p's look like a peanut. And hydrogen is a 1s. right? So we have hydrogen and we have chlorine. So this sharing of electrons, this overlap, is representing this, and this is representing the same thing. So all three of these, this dashed line, this rectangle, and this overlap are all showing the exact same thing. So this is a sigma bond. It's a single covalent bond. So now the electrons that are here can move in between that 1s and 3p. All right, so let's go back here. So this is what it's showing you right here. So here is hydrogen's 1s and chlorine's 3p. So this is before they were overlapping. They're now overlapping. This last picture, again, don't worry, this was like the sausage over here where it combines both spaces. I expect you to be able to draw, these representations, okay? So this is just showing you thematically what happens. These two shapes basically overlap to form one big blob of space. Okay, so let's look at another one. Here we have an example of a fluorine. So here is our fluorine. Okay. So fluorine has, again, there's two there, a single covalent bond between the two fluorine atoms. So if we look at the fluorine atoms, we have here, really the valence shell are the second energy ones here. So each fluorine has 7 valence electrons, but the only one that is able to overlap is a 2p because it has a full 2s, 2 full 2p's, and 1 2p that is half filled. Same deal with the other fluorine. So what this is showing you here is this is basically 1 2p from one fluorine, and this is the other 2p from the second fluorine. So this overlap here is our sigma bond. All right, so if we were to show this as our orbital diagram, so let's say I had 2 fluorines, remember I only have to show the half-filled orbital that's going to be involved in bonding here. All right, so here's my other one. So my sigma bond is a 2p from one fluorine overlapping with a 2p from the other. So then, of course, it would simply look like this, right? 1 2p, and then my second 2p. So this here is my sigma bond showing the overlapping of the two 2p orbitals. Okay, so before we get into hybrid bonds, actually, or hybrid orbitals, I want to just discuss what happens if you have more than one bond. So far, right, we looked at hydrogen, we looked at HCl, and we looked at fluorines. I want to go through what happens when you have more than one bond, what that looks like. So let's do a molecule of water. Okay, so my first recommendation when you're doing this is to draw the Lewis structure first. Right, so here is our Lewis structure of water. So we have a single covalent bond between oxygen and one hydrogen, and then we have it for a second hydrogen. And actually, you know what I'm going to do, just to make this a little bit clearer to see, is we'll use different colors here to organize it. So oxygen will be black, and then the two hydrogens will be different colors. So if we were to look at oxygen's energy level diagram, okay, so oxygen has a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 electrons. So remember, our S and P are our valence electrons. Now you can see here that it has 2 half-filled orbitals that are ready to be bonded. So these are the 2 orbitals that are going to be involved. One will go with a red hydrogen, the other one will go with the blue hydrogen. Sometimes if you are not able to kind of visualize what is bonding with what, I would recommend to write out your electron configuration or an energy level diagram so you can see, oh, these are the 2 that are going to actually be bonding because all of the other ones are filled.